can step away and do that.
Okay, testing, testing, testing. All right, it sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. So this is a really big topic on a very interesting question in the Ethereum Classic community, which is, what should our proof of work algorithm be? And I think that a really good algorithm to choose is called SHA3, and I'm going to be explaining the rationale behind that in this presentation. And I think it's going to put us on the right track in the future to becoming a legitimate competitor to a lot of other blockchains out there, and actually showing why Ethereum Classic matters and what it does beyond just regular Ethereum. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak here. It really means a lot to me. So the first question that we really need to ask ourselves, which is, why should we actually change our algorithm? Because I think that we're at a crucial time in which we can actually be able to do this successfully and be able to do this in a way that maintains community consensus, because we're small. And this is a very difficult thing to do in larger projects, but when we're right now, a single conference room of people that can all get together and discuss, and the stakeholders all really care, and we're not that big, we can act more nimbly and we can do the right thing. So why do we want to consider changing our algorithm? Well, it really begins on January 9th when ETC was 51% attacked. And basically what happened was that there was a series of 51% attacks in which rogue mining pools were able to acquire a majority of the hash power on the network and were able to publish chains that would reverse transactions that they had made to exchanges. So they would send ETC to an exchange, they traded it for Bitcoin, they withdrew the Bitcoin, and then they published a side mine chain that would then give the ETC back to them. And when this happened, it was a huge shock to the community. People had sort of been saying that this was possible, but no one had really kind of seen them in the wild. And what exchanges started doing was that they started requiring over 4,000 blocks for confirmations. There was talks of potentially delisting Ethereum Classic. And that kind of brings me to the next point, which is that if Ethereum Classic cannot properly be traded and sent to exchanges, we break one of the core elements of proof of work consensus. So for proof of work consensus to work, you really need three elements. You need to have miners, you need to have exchanges, and you need to have users, developers, merchants, etc. So basically what happened was that the miners are able to mine and protect the network and generate new coins, and they send that to exchanges, and the exchanges are able to convert those coins into actually fiat currency that the miners can then use to pay their power bills. But what happens when there's a 51% attack and exchanges start requiring over 4,000 block confirmations, which is over 48 hours, so that's actually slower than a wire transfer, is that honest miners are no longer able to actually be able to deposit to exchanges and to be able to trade that for fiat currency to be able to pay their power bills. And what this can lead to is sort of a negative feedback loop in which hostile miners are able to repeatedly double spend, which causes exchanges to want to delist or increase the block confirmations for Ethereum Classic. The whole time, users are basically terrified. They don't understand what's going on. They're questioning it. They can't use any of the dApps on the platform safely because they don't know if their blocks are going to be confirmed. And this can lead to a negative feedback loop. And what we know is that these are the public statements kind of on the side from the exchanges. They were saying that Ethereum Classic was not living up to sort of its end, and they were saying maybe we should consider a proof of stake algorithm instead, which is kind of funny considering our history and considering kind of what ETC stands for, that they would be recommending we go to proof of stake. But I think that it's a really good point that exchanges really do care actually about the project and whether or not it's profitable for them to be able to turn it into fiat currency safely. So when this happened, purely a dApp developer on Ethereum Classic, so my interest is writing Solidity contracts, basically creating financial instruments on it, because I think that the advantages of what a Turing-complete proof-of-work system provides is the ability to completely redefine how people all around the world interact financially, and it provides access to people. So that was kind of my background in Ethereum, and I didn't really know anything about how proof-of-work really functioned on Ethereum Classic. So after this attack, I really started looking into it because there's no instruction manual or Stack Overflow question for how do you respond to a 51% attack. You just have to go along with it as it happens. And I started noticing that we didn't use a standard hashing algorithm. We used a custom one called Ethash, which was created in 2015 with the idea of being ASIC resistant. And what ASIC resistant means is that it's supposedly difficult to build a dedicated device to be able to mine this. Now, what was interesting about this is that it sounds very good in theory, this idea of, okay, well, the everyday person can be a normal gamer and they can just sync with the network and turn on the miner and start getting new coins. But the reality is very different. So there's a number of currencies that have all tried to be ASIC resistant. So you can see them on there. There's Ethash, which is used for Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. You have Scrypt. You have Equihash for Zcash. You have Kryptonite for Monero. You also have Ravencoin as well. And all of these proof-of-work systems have claimed to be ASIC resistant. But what eventually happens is that as the market cap of these systems grows, it becomes financially incentivized to create ASICs for them. So what I would posit is that ASIC resistant is a spectrum. It is ASIC resistant until it becomes financially viable to build an ASIC for it. Now, the dangerous part about this is that what a lot of the time ASIC resistance means is just very poor documentation. So if the system is very badly documented, then the developer team or the people that are close to the project have an inherent advantage in creating ASICs because they understand how the network works. So I think that it's still a legitimate question as to whether or not the 51% attacks that were carried out could have been connected to rogue ASIC miners who might have been building on Ethereum at the time. And really looking into the whole question of ASIC resistance kind of led me to a variety of other issues with Ethash that I think prevent Ethereum Classic from truly becoming a Bitcoin level proof-of-work network. So specifically the 4 gigabyte DAG that is required by miners, and this is an exponential memory construct that is growing. There's no constraints in the system. It'll just keep growing indefinitely. The fact that there has to be a 16 megabyte pseudo-random cache required for every block. A huge problem is the fact that we're a minority chain. So being 1/20th the market cap of Ethereum means that Ethereum mining pools, who have a lot of incentives actually to sometimes see us fail, it's very easy for them to come over and attack the chain, destroy Ethereum Classic, and then move back to mining Ethereum profitably. So that's a major problem. The fact that it's a roadblock for Fly clients and Light clients, this 16 megabyte pseudo-random cache just causes tons of problems. And then there's also the fact that it's built on the false assumption of ASIC resistance, which may have been true in the past, but is no longer true with Ethash. There are ASICs for them, and it's actually not very widely available. We don't know how many companies have them. It's one of those things where if you're in the know, maybe you have access. If you're not in the know, then good luck trying to build one. And personally, the biggest issue that I see with Ethash is the lack of safety checks, standards, and documentation. So if you try to find documentation on Ethash to write your own miner, for example, you'll find one page on the Ethereum wiki, which is about 4 paragraphs. And for a hashing algorithm, which is probably one of the most important elements of a cryptocurrency, it is the cryptography of cryptocurrency, to have 4 paragraphs describing the hashing algorithm is actually absurd. So I just want to leave this first part with a quote from one of the best cryptographers sort of alive nowadays. His name is Bruce Schneier, and he wrote a number of hashing algorithms, he said. And what his point is that it's very easy to actually create these algorithms. The hard part is to create one that nobody else could break. So what I think that the issue with Ethash is that it makes sense because it's poorly documented. It's ASIC resistant because not very many people know about it. But the more that people know about it, the more imbalanced the market for miners and the system can become. So let's move on from Ethash and let's move into what I consider to be a fantastic alternative and a great opportunity to upgrade, which is a hashing algorithm called SHA3. So what is SHA3? You can actually see it right there. So this is on the slide. This is the entire implementation of SHA3 in one tweetable image. And what this means is that you can run this and you can determine on your own the proof of work that is done by the network. So with Ethash, in order to compute the proof of work, you have to maintain all of these giant caches. It's very unclear how to even write this. But with SHA3, you can be anywhere on the earth, and as long as you can run this very basic little program right here, you can determine what is the chain with the most hash power associated with it. So that is like kind of the core of it, is that it is so simple yet so powerful. So what are the two main reasons why SHA3 is an amazing algorithm? Well, first of all, it's safe. So SHA3 is a title that was actually earned. It stands for Secure Hashing Algorithm 3, and it was the product of a NIST secure hashing competition that was put on between 2007 to 2012. And the reason why it was chosen was because it's very fundamentally different in its construction than SHA2. So what NIST was worried about was that because of all of the cryptography that relies on SHA2, if that were to get cracked, what would we be able to use in scientific or defense-based applications? So they wanted to find something that was a very different construction. Second of all, another reason why I think it's very important is because it's extremely high performance. So SHA3 was selected as a winner because it was actually about 4x more performant in hardware and in FPGA and ASIC implementations than SHA2 was. And I think that that performance gain is something that we're going to feel not only in the mining market, but in the node market, where when we're confirming blocks, we don't have to run this costly, memory-intensive hashing algorithm with this Ethash. We can run in a mobile phone or even in a smart contract the SHA3 algorithm, and it's very small and very efficient. And the reason why it's able to do that is because it fundamentally uses one less chip instruction than SHA2 does. So SHA3 has a bunch of bitwise rotations. SHA2 requires this thing called an add, which is a very difficult feature. And then finally, it's the accessibility to smart contracts through the EVM. So if you really understand how the EVM works, you'll know that Keccak 256, SHA3, they're synonymous, is used everywhere throughout the EVM. So really the big motivation of this is that let's standardize our entire hardware stack to use the best algorithm possible. And it's already being used everywhere. So how was SHA3 actually created? Well, it was the product of a 5-year competition. And basically it started with 64 initial teams, and it got narrowed down through individual rounds. So they would have hundreds of papers written by universities all around the world looking at analysis of it, proofs, whether or not this is an efficient algorithm, reviews, performance benchmarks, implementations. And basically, you can see in the quote on the side here from John Kelsey, who was the NIST head scientist who actually ran the competition. And they were very emphatic that they said that Keccak won because it was an extremely high security margin, it had excellent hardware performance, and it had good design diversity from SHA2. So these are all reasons why we as a community should be interested in SHA3 and why we should consider this as a proof of work algorithm, because it's a really good one. So this is probably the most important slide, in my opinion, in this whole presentation, which is showing that hashes have a lifespan. Hashes can die. So this chart right here it's called the rainbow chart. And what it shows is all of the hashing algorithms that have been considered official hashing algorithms. So Ethash has never really made it to an official hashing algorithm, but these are the ones that have been given the blessing by a variety of either FIPS or ISO standards. starting in 1990 with MD2. And basically what happens is they start and they work for a period of time, and then an academic will come out with a paper saying that there's a theoretical attack that can be committed against it. They'll still work for a little bit. People will say, okay, maybe we should start using something else. Then that theoretical attack will be implemented, but it won't be computationally efficient. And then finally, they will eventually prove the attack, which will be a hashing collision, which is when two pieces of separate input produce the same hashing output. And when that hashing collision occurs, at that point, the hashing algorithm is considered dead. It is no longer safe to be used in any application at all, and any accumulated proof of work that were to happen before that point is considered done, because it can be faked by somebody trivially doing a hash collision attack. So if we go by this chart, we'll actually see that there are not very many algorithms by 2017 that are actually considered fully safe. So there's really only two of them, or there's three of them actually. There's RIPE-MD, which is kind of an older one and it's not very high performance. There's SHA2, which is used by Bitcoin, and then there's SHA3, Ketchak, which is not really used by any proof of work system right now, and why I'm proposing it. And just as a side note, you can see, remember how I was saying earlier that NIST wanted to have design diversity. Why did they want to do that? Well, because MD4, MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-2 actually all use the same fundamental construction, which is the Merkle-Damgard construction. SHA-3 uses an entirely different architecture called the sponge architecture, which provides a level of safety. It's in a sense a cryptographic hedge that if the Merkle-Damgard structure were to fail entirely, that we would be able to have something else that's very different. So another advantage of it is that it is extremely high performance. So because of all of the papers that were written about SHA-3 for this testing process, we were able to actually see, well, like, how well does it actually doing? So this is an image of FPGA trials that were being done on SHA-3. And as you can see, it has about 4 times the efficiency of SHA-2. So I'm going to go through as well. There were a number of other trials that were being run against it. You had the energy efficiency test. So it's about 5 times the energy efficiency per hash of SHA-2. It has 3 times the space efficiency, and it's extremely efficient in both FPGA and ASICs. So that really matters both in the mining community, but also on integrated hardware like cell phones or a variety of other things that might need to run nodes where they're doing a lot of SHA-3 calculations all the time. Yeah, please look through this stuff. There's hundreds of papers written on this. This is not like some secret that is just being discovered. So this is a really important spec sheet right here, which is basically I'm looking at the differences between SHA-2, which is Bitcoin mining, versus SHA-3. And basically there's a few key differences that I think will lead to very different divergent market outcomes. So first of all, the block time on Bitcoin is a 600 second blocks, while on Ethereum Classic it's 15 seconds. So I think this is going to lead to some very, very different mining operations because latency becomes a huge factor now. Because if it takes you 2 seconds to get that block to start mining and then it takes another 2 seconds to propagate that, well, you've already lost 4 seconds of your 15. So that isn't that big of a difference for Bitcoin because you've got such long block times. But for Ethereum Classic, it's actually going to change things a lot. And I think that it's going to mean that latency all of a sudden matters a lot more. You can see the supply cap. So Ethereum Classic has far less of it that's been mined. It has a cap of 210 million, and we're only less than halfway. We're around halfway there. And then you can see some of the smallest units. And then another interesting factor is that miners would have far more capacity to actually run it. They would have a 256-bit mixed hash plus a 64-bit nonce. For a total of 320 bits of capacity, which would actually be really great if they're trying to do on-chain mining contracts or a variety of other ideas. So let's go through the benefits. So why will SHA-3 empower us? Well, the first most important thing right now that I can see is that it will immediately give us protection from 51% attacks, because right now we are 1/20th the size of Ethereum. As I said earlier, we can be attacked at any moment. It can happen today by Ethereum miners. So the goal of SHA3 is that we can basically move to a new hashing ecosystem, and we can become sort of the apex predator of that ecosystem where we no longer have to worry about being the minority chain anymore. And I'm very interested in Bitcoin. I've been that way for a while, and I think that it's best to try to follow the path of how Bitcoin is able to thrive, which is we want to be the biggest proof of work algorithm in our ecosystem. So the second benefit that I can see is that now all of a sudden we have a useful commodity as a chain, which is a huge amount of SHA3 hash power. So if SHA3 is considered the most valuable hashing algorithm out there right now, Ethereum Classic will be a tappable source. We can provide that hash power as a service to other blockchains. And there's a variety of other things out there. I can talk to you guys after. But I see benefits with Fly Client / Light Client. I see us having the potential to do on-chain mining contracts. So rather than having to do trusted relationships where if you mine this much, then I have to trust that you'll send me this many coins, for example, we can program that into a smart contract because our smart contracts understand SHA3. They don't understand how Ethash works. Another benefit is that it becomes far easier to do open source, highly portable mining software. So right now the Ethash market is dominated by closed source mining software like Claymore and Phoenix. I didn't know anything about these before I started researching this talk, and really what I learned about is kind of scary because most of the mining happens through closed source clients. We don't even know how they really work under the surface. And then finally, they can be Ethereum Classic can become an incentivized randomness beacon, which is something that I think is tremendously important for ETH 2.0. I think it's useful for Cardano and a variety of other platforms. So this is another reason why I'm interested in it, is because I think that ASICs fundamentally lead to more distributed mining. I think that if you look at, so I have a little bit of experience working in the renewable energy space and trying to understand the economics of it. And really, when you're working with somebody who, let's say, is setting up a wind farm, these are not the type of people who want to get into the details of which graphics card they're going to try to hook up to their windmill. They want a commodity box that they can plug in next to it and that they can forecast for the next year how much coins that will be able to produce because it directly affects the profitability of their project. So I think that if we move to a direction in which we have low cost, open hardware that is easy to distribute to a variety of areas because we have a lot of manufacturers, and I think we will have a lot of manufacturers, I think that we can basically encourage renewable energy use, and I think that's very important for proof of work chains to try to move in that direction. And on the side, actually, that box right there is being used actually for methane flaring, which is a huge problem that nobody has been able to come up with a economically feasible way to sort of solve. Almost done. And then ultimately, I see it kind of culminating in what I see as the SHA3 standard, which is that Ethereum Classic has a different hashing algorithm than Bitcoin. And because it is a different hashing algorithm, it has value because either of those could break. Now, if Ethereum Classic is the dominant SHA3 algorithm, we will have sort of this ability to have programmable Bitcoin-like properties. And I think that that's tremendously useful for the decentralized finance space, for the dApp space, and kind of what excited me so much in the first place. So I think that this can actually really increase the value of the coin a lot. That's not my primary motivating factor, but I think that it is something that really could happen. All right, so the final section. What do we actually need to do to get there? What is the action? Well, so far we've achieved a number of things. We've created the proposal. We've implemented a SHA3 proof of work client based on a fork of Parity. That's the Aster testnet. We've created an open source CPU miner, and we've been able to achieve about 200 kilohash a second on purely a virtual server. So this is without any optimizations. We were able to get 200 kilohash a second for something that we wrote in 3 hours. So we think that the performance ceiling for this is extremely high. And then we also have had community members that have decided to test it on FPGA miners, and they've been able to verify that it is in fact usable as a proof of work algorithm, which was an open question. So now we get to the interesting part, which is when would we implement this on the Ethereum Classic network? Now, my personal belief is that we have to be somewhat careful about it, because if we take too little time, or if we do it too quickly, then we run potential development risks. So as I see it, there's 3 potential windows that we can go to. There's block 10 million, which is around March 2020. There's block 11 million, which is September 2020. And then block 12 million, which is January 2021. I believe that the best chance for Ethereum Classic is to adopt this by block 11 million. And the reason why is that if we take too much time and we keep discussing this, there's a real risk that other proof of work chains will adopt this before we do, and we will lose the ability to become the apex sort of algorithm on SHA3. We'll have to be another minority chain, which is, in my opinion, the worst potential outcome. So September 2020, block 11 million is what my vote is for. And this is kind of my roadmap that I've outlined right here, and I'm going to be posting these slides online so anybody can come and check them out. But basically, we've done the initial work on ECIP-1049, and what we want to do is we want to use this period of time between block 9 million and block 10 million to do discussion and debate. And at block 10 million, because this is such a new change, nobody has really ever written the book on how do you change proof of work for a running algorithm. I think that the best option moving forward is that we collect commitment statements, either yes or no, from the major clients at that particular time. So come block 10 million, it'll be very nice to be able to hear from the teams behind Parity, GetC, Multigeth, and Mantis whether or not they see this as a viable system for Ethereum Classic and whether or not they support this change. And if we know by a 10 million that the majority of clients are willing to support this as the default option, then I think I feel comfortable saying that we should move ECIP-1049 to accepted. And at that stage, the mining community will feel confident enough to actually start creating rigs and to start creating devices and marketing them because they know that it'll happen by block 11 million. And we should try to squeeze in a testnet at some point between there as well. The Aster testnet was nice, but it does not fully demonstrate the cutover, which is a very important factor that we're going to need to model. So there's open research that needs to be done by the developers as well before we were to be able to implement 1049. So that's it for my talk. It was somewhat brief. But I want you guys to join the discussion, keep it going. So that link is to like a Telegram room that I built a few weeks ago. We've got a lot of like the smartest people from all around the world in the chip industry kind of in that room discussing in real time whether or not this is going to be a good plan, what they think about it. So everybody